It's easy to become a Body Kindness Insider. Just visit bodykindnessbook.com and click Get Started on the homepage. Give your name and email and you'll get instant access to my free e-course. You're going to get a video about 5 health rules to break. I'm also going to give you a reflection and goals packet. You'll get a free chapter of my book, Body Kindness, if you don't have it already. And you're going to get one of my clients' favorite tools, and it's awareness building health and happiness journal that allows you to observe your day-to-day body kindness progress without counting calories, wearing trackers, and all those other things that just end up making you feel not good enough. Plus, you're going to get my tips and best inspirations over email. So if you're not yet a Body Kindness Insider, visit bodykindnessbook.com. Click Get Started, sign up. You can get going on your journey right away. And I will be sending you some check-in emails, including an invitation to our free Facebook group that is just for Body Kindness Insiders. I'll see you there. And we're back with another episode in our series as we are all working together to explore body kindness roadblocks. Hasn't it been such an enlightening and informative experience so far? I really hope you've been enjoying it as much as I have. I've gotten some great feedback in the Body Kindness Let's Talk About That Show group, which is free and available on Facebook. It is a closed group so that I can kind of shoo away those spammers and bots, but you can find it easily if you search in Facebook. I also will include a link in the show notes, and you can answer the questions if you want. It helps me. You don't have to answer the questions. I will let anyone in, and I would love to connect with you there and get some show feedback. You can also talk to guests for that week and the co-host. So it's really an interesting opportunity to connect more and talk a little bit deeper about what we're talking about on the shows. I'm really excited to bring you this conversation with body image activist and author Rosie Molinary. She's been a shero of mine for many years. Way before I wrote Body Kindness, I put this thing out there called the Me Movement, and with hashtag me first, and which as a mom, now I totally understand why mothers were like, why are you doing this hashtag? This is making me feel even more guilty. But it was coming from the right place. I believe that it was about the mindset that my needs matter too. Anyway, now we have Body Kindness. So, but Rosie, we connected early on Twitter, and she was always supportive and encouraging throughout the years. And I really look forward to sharing our conversation with you. I definitely recommend her work and her books and her getting on her social media radar and all those things. You can find all those links in the show notes. And I really hope our conversation helps you practice more radical self-acceptance and body kindness. I would love to get your feedback. If you want to email me personally, that's Rebecca@bodykindnessbook.com, as well as in the Facebook group. And before I go into the show, I just want to give a simple request. If you could please leave a rating and review for this Body Kindness podcast on iTunes, I greatly appreciate it. I look for feedback, and all those things really matter to help for show visibility. And it makes me feel good. Okay. It just makes me feel like I'm putting good stuff there out in the world. Because real health is about being good to yourself. It's time for Body Kindness, the place where all bodies fit and weight is just a number. Hi, I'm Rebecca Scritchfield, author of the book Body Kindness, registered dietitian, nutritionist, and host of this podcast. My topic today is radical self-acceptance. And this topic is important to Body Kindness because I believe you can't become who you really want to be until you accept yourself for who you are right now. We all need a bit of peace and a truce and some calm compassion to really work with the person we are now, and like a caregiver for ourselves, carve out the path in the direction of the kind of life we want. My special guest to discuss this today is Rosie Molinary. As a radical self-acceptance champion, Rosie uses profound questions and wholehearted connection to empower people to treat themselves well so they can connect with their talents and passions to authentically and intentionally live their purpose and help heal the world. The author of Beautiful You, A Daily Guide to Radical Self-Acceptance, and Hijas Americanas, Beauty, Body Image, and Growing Up Latina, both books by Seal Press. Rosie teaches at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, serves as a national Dove Self-Esteem Project educator, offers workshops and retreats, and speaks on self-acceptance, body image, self-care, media literacy, the Latina experience, and intentional living around the country. Rosie also serves as a creative catalyst to companies and brands that wish to provide a synergistic, empowered, and soulful experience to their clients and employees as they serve the world through workshop and retreat facilitation and consultation. A committed activist, Rosie helps found Hammers, a nonprofit initiative to provide emergency home repair for low-income families in her community, and Circle de Luz, a nonprofit that radically empowers young Latinas by supporting their transformation through extensive mentoring, holistic programming, and scholarship funds for further education. Welcome to the show, Rosie. To get started, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your work?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. And I was struck in your introduction when you were talking about how weight is just a number, and it reminded me of this line in Beautiful You, maybe in day 2, where I talk about how weight is just a number and we are only good, that there's no number that makes us good or bad. And so that just really resonated with me. So I'm supposed to tell you about myself
and what you've been doing lately.
And what I've been doing lately. Good. I'm glad you reminded me of that, because that is how broken my brain is. I'm like, what was that question 3 minutes ago? I am a writer and educator and activist and a mom. And I am really inspired by this idea that every single one of us is here on purpose, that we each have a unique gift that we are meant to give this world that is one part of a solution that this world desperately needs. And that our purpose has nothing to do with how our body looks, and that too often our ability to live our purpose is inhibited by our relationship with ourselves. And so I get really excited about working with individuals on creating healthy, whole relationships with themselves so that they can go out and do the stuff they're meant to do in this world. Because what really drives me is this idea that surely there's so many brilliant people around us that we have the solutions that we need for this world to be whole. And it's a matter of us getting whole ourselves so that we can make that happen for the world.
Well, I just love that. I mean, it reminds me of Evelyn Tribole, co-author of Intuitive Eating. She is one of my mentors, and early on in my transformation away from being like the number one. Well, I don't know if I was number one, but like all I did was diets and weight loss is the bottom line. I called it healthy, and it was a big mistake. I started dieting around puberty. And even when I was in nutrition school, I love nutrition school because it was helping people with diets and lose weight and like rules. And I was like, yee. And it took a couple of, gobsmack, wake up calls, aha moments, whatever you want to call them, for me to finally get some courage to change, to realize what I was doing was unhelpful to me and my clients, and to change. And I studied intuitive eating through supervision with Evelyn Tribole. And one day she said, you can only take people as far as you have gone. And I was like, ew. And that's when I realized that I still had my own work to do on body image in particular. It's one of those things, and I feel like no matter how all the work you do to try to inoculate yourself, we all live in a diet culture, and you never know when we're going to kind of like take the bait and bite the fish hook and kind of get snagged by it again. So
it's so true. I think about the moment of like aha for me, and I was a really committed activist from a young age. And when I was in college, I worked with young men who were gang affiliated. And that was just my passion point. And I had this realization as I was working with them that their violent expressions were really rooted in self-hatred. And it was this profound moment of like, wow, like this anger is being lived out. And sort of simultaneously, I had this moment where I have pretty big curly hair and have lived in the South my whole life. And for a long time tried to straighten it and then would walk outside and it would instantly, like the humidity would be like, boing! And, but I would spend an hour a day trying to straighten it and all this money, like trying to buy the products that said they would straighten my hair. And one day I was straightening my hair. I was getting ready to go to this alternative school that I volunteered at. But I was, sitting there in the mirror, like straightening my hair and thinking about what I was doing that day at the school. And had this moment where I looked at the little bin that held all my products and easily it had $150 worth of products in it. And I went to school in the 90s and I had the scholarship that paid me $150 a month for spending money. And I thought, wow, that's my entire spending money in this bucket. Like I'm not going on adventures with my friends or buying supplies that I need because I'm putting it into my hair. And then it made me think about, well, how much time do I put into my hair? And I thought, wow, I put an hour a day into my hair. And if I do that 5 days a week, 50 days a year, that's 250 hours. And how do I feel about the idea that I spend more than 10 total days a year on my hair? And how will I feel about that if I get to be 80 years old? And I've spent, what would that, I can't even do the math, thousands of days of my life just on my hair. Like, does that vibe with how I want to be in the world? And it was like this big, like moment of what I want to do is hurry up and get my hair done so I can go to the school and hang out with these young men that I really enjoy and whose conversations change my life and change me. But I might be running late because I'm trying to straighten my hair that will instantly go curly when I go outside. And it was just, and I'm spending all this money that I don't really have. And it was this moment of, I have bought in to what I've been told a woman should buy into in order to, get permission from who? I don't even know who I'm trying to get permission and approval from, when like those guys that I show up for just care that they are seen and heard and understood. Not one of them will be able to describe my hair texture later, but they will be able to describe how I made them feel. And it was a game-changing moment for me where I thought, I do not want to buy into my appearance being the most important part of how I show up in the world. The most important part of how I show up in the world is how my heart shows up.
That's so good. It's like the real value that you offer and the real worth that you provide is outside of appearance or the shell of your body, that really has nothing to do with it. I mean, if anything, you could be grateful for the body that gets you to get to do your work.
And so then it becomes really different, right? So it's like, oh, you're my vehicle and I need to treat you well because you allow me to experience every good thing I've ever had. But treating you well is profoundly different from punishing you with my mind and words and actions, and it's not about anything prescriptive.
Yeah. So what is radical self-acceptance? Give us like a working definition of what we're talking about.
So I like to think of radical self-acceptance as the inherent belief that we are worthy and enough simply because we were born. There is nothing that we have to do to prove our worth. And that in practicing radical self-acceptance, what you develop is this real sort of sense of neutrality about yourself, that as you take in information, you always choose not to have an adversarial relationship with yourself. So let's say that I have an exchange with my little boy this morning, and maybe I am a little bit shorter with him than I want to be. As he leaves to go to school and I reflect on it, I never go to a place in my head where it's like, I'm the worst mom ever. Instead, I understand that I am not bad or ruined or imperfect, and that there's nothing fundamentally wrong about me, and that moment just has information for me. And so instead, if I'm in a moment of like self-reflection and an opportunity for self-growth, I say, well, what's the information in that for me? And so I think, well, I hadn't eaten before we had that exchange and I was a little bit hangry. Or I say, wow, I read an email right before he walked in the kitchen and it caused me concern. And my concern was displaced on him. or I'd gotten in a squabble with my husband and it was displaced because of that. But when you're practicing radical self-acceptance, you choose to recognize your humanity just as you recognize and respect the humanity of every other person that you interact with. And so it's really about embracing a practice of noticing in your life, but not notating or shaming in your life.
Interesting. So shaming would be being judgmental, kind of
Right.
letting your inner critic thrive, as opposed to finding your caregiver voice that is more compassionate. And
right. And the thing that I always, like I tell my students, is everything is just information. It is not a grade. And so even when you get a grade, so you get back a test from me and on it you earned a D. The answer is not, I'm stupid. The answer is, what happened there that this was what I was able to show of my learning. And so what you might find is, you know what, I had a sinus infection while I was taking that test and I just wanted to get done. Or, you know what, I don't take notes really well. I sort of spaced out, and so my notes aren't great, and that's what's up. Or, you know what, I didn't study that week because I was in a fight with my roommate, or there was a concert the night before and I went to it. But everything becomes just information and not a place for judgment, just a place for you to observe and learn.
well, yeah. So it's like the growth mindset stuff. It's an opportunity to learn and grow. You can observe scenarios. It's an opportunity to learn and grow and kind of get curious about, and then let that inform maybe your next decision. I want to talk a bit about women of color, especially Latinas, because I know that's where you tend to focus. And I have some Latina blood, but I present as just like white woman. And so I don't think I really deal with a lot of the cultural oppressions that come. And I wanted to devote some time to talking about this. I mean, just being in our diet culture, I mean, just happening to be female, you're going to have the expectation of thin is good, larger bodied is bad. And that was always what my struggle was, comparing to friends. And we actually were lower income growing up. So it wasn't like that sort of, we have nothing better to do because we have all this money and all these vacation homes and all this stuff. You know, it was like hitting me on the low income side. It was just comparing and despairing. But our society says, you know, you're not good enough unless you're working on your weight and your appearance. And I know that it can be particularly difficult because it's the intersection, right, of beauty standards, thin standards, and other oppressions that exist that like white people might not really notice. So what could you enlighten the listeners on these concerns?
So my first book is about Latina women's coming of age experiences in the U.S. And I wrote it a decade ago and had this really fascinating moment while I was researching it. When I wrote the book, I interviewed 100 women and I did a web-based survey with 500 women about their coming of age stories. And I'd been really interested in telling these stories because I'd grown up in South Carolina as what felt like the only Latina that I or anyone else knew. And so I had started to really think about, how do Latinas who come of age in a home that has one idea of what's beautiful and feminine and appropriate for women, then go out into mainstream America and hear a whole nother litany about what's beautiful and feminine and appropriate for women, reconcile those messages to then become themselves. And my upbringing hadn't really afforded me the opportunity to be able to answer that questions with like, oh, well, this is what all my girlfriends did. And so I thought, well, this is the book I want to write. And so in writing the book, one of the things I was struck by was that at that time, there were what felt like a lot more Latina women in pop culture. And I thought, well, gosh, this must feel profoundly different. And maybe it feels incredibly empowering for these women. Whereas when I was growing up in the 90s and I would say to someone, I'm Puerto Rican, they would say to me, you're Puerto what? Like, you need to be white or black. And so I thought, well, it must be really different. And I bet it's really empowering. And what I found in doing these interviews were that, yes, there were more Latinas in pop culture and commonly known. But what the women spoke to was this idea that there was really sort of one trophy woman from each country. And so if you were Puerto Rican, so people thought of Jennifer Lopez when you said Puerto Rico, or Salma Hayek when you said Mexico. And they certainly weren't thinking of Cameron Diaz when you mentioned Cuba, and they weren't necessarily thinking of Rosario Dawson. And so what the women said was, what has happened is we've been idealized. And I can't be an Afro-Latina from Puerto Rico because people are like, well, wait, why don't you look like J-Lo? And they said that's almost harder than no one having any clue. So if no one had a clue, then they would say, oh, well, I don't know what Puerto Rico is, so I'm not going to put you in a bucket. But if they have a clue, they're like, well, you don't look like Jennifer Lopez, so you're not really Puerto Rican, or dismissive. And I thought that was this really interesting moment. And it reminded me of this experience I had when I was in college. I was putting in contacts, and a friend of mine said, and I was pretty distinctly different looking from the other women on campus. I was short and certainly more curvy and had black curly hair, and most women were taller and thinner and blonder. And someone said to me, as I was putting in my contacts, you would be so exotic looking if you just had different colored eyes. And in that moment, what I heard was, I was just different enough to be dismissed and not different enough to be interesting. So I think it's interesting to be a woman of color and to have these different iterations of how we have to navigate the world, from everything from, do you deserve to be at the school? What does your culture mean I get to assume or interpret about you? Where you have access and why, people's assumptions about you, and then to have this layer of body, how we're embodied on top of us. And I think that it's human nature to want to make things as easy as possible. And we do that by creating boxes of understanding. And so what I want to be able to say about a person is, oh, if you're Puerto Rican, that means this about you. Oh, if you are gay, that means this about you. Oh, if you are lower income or you live in that neighborhood, it means this about you. And we've done that out of just sheer effort to make things easier. And the irony is those boxes make things so much more profoundly hard. They make it hard for the person that we're placing in the box, and they make it hard for us because it makes it harder for us to bridge the distance between us. And so I think that the profound thing to understand is how limiting these boxes are how we should begin our interactions with people with a deep desire to understand and to have them lead the way in how we interpret their stories and how we understand their stories. What's interesting is I encourage my students of color, as much as they can, if they find a place where they can offer this, to try to navigate, if they're healed enough in a spot and okay enough in a spot, to how to navigate helping those they're interacting with have better language. And so by that, I mean that I am often asked, what are you? And I am asked, what are you, at really bizarre places. Like I was once ordering a sandwich at McAllister's, and the guy who was doing my order said, what are you? As I was trying to decide my side. And I know that he did not intend to be offensive. He was just deeply curious. And so one way that I will sometimes handle those sort of questions that are intrusive and inappropriate is to say, why do you ask? And so, for example, I am the mother of a little boy from Ethiopia, and my husband is a white man with red hair. And so we are a fascinating threesome moving through the world. And we get asked, especially when our child was an infant, some really inappropriate stuff, like how much did you pay for your baby? Who's his real mother? Those sort of things. And for a long time, it felt like we were just sort of taking the punches. And then I said to my husband, listen, we are fully formed, in terms of not being in pain over this. And we could really help someone who is not yet in that place by teaching these people better language. And so approaching these questions so that we have some better language. And so often in those situations now we'll say, why do you ask? And then the person has to think through, Well, you look like my friend Gina, who's Puerto Rican. And so I was wondering if you were Puerto Rican too. And it helps them to get to a place of understanding where they're coming from and how they might hear to someone else. But the other piece is that sometimes in that moment, I'll just teach the better question. So if a person says, how much did you pay for your baby? I'll say, oh, are you trying to understand whether or not the adoption process is too expensive for the average person? And they're like, oh, yeah, that's what I meant. And so I say that because now that I'm at a place where the questions don't wound me and don't contribute to the pain that I'm already through, which when I was younger, I wasn't in this place. But I feel like now one of the places that I can be of service is to help people better navigate those questions and experiences. And so how might I better interact with a person of color if I'm just trying to understand and I don't really know the questions or right words to ask? And so that's the place where I try to meet them and teach them better words or questions or a better way, a more magnanimous or generous way to express my interest or one's interest. Because I think, and with a sensitivity that we're all on a spectrum of healing our pains and growing. And so not everybody can be there at any given time. But if we do get to that place where, all right, I'm in some better shape, one of the ways we can pay that forward is by being sort of the teachers in that instance. But I think that in navigating beauty and body image, we're sometimes so consumed in how we experience the world that we forget to look at, oh, and if you add these 4 layers for a person's experience, being poor, being, brown or black, like what does that mean?
Mm-hmm. So if I understand you correctly, it's kind of like there are labels, there are ideals in society that are created and that we're taught to conform to that sets up our sense of self-worth and value. And when we don't line up with the ideal, we feel excluded and our well-being can suffer. And then you talk about the idea of like this box, right? So culture can put you in the box, but then there's another layer of it, this human nature piece that, we are human beings, so we have to work with the human brain. So even outside of the cultural roles that is defining us and labeling us and putting us in this box, that it also makes it accessible for the human brain to say, like, when I see this person who looks this way, then this is how I kind of categorize them, just as kind of like the way the brain works. And then it's like our job to be aware of this. Like, so for our own personal individual well-being, it's our job to be aware of these factors and say, you know what, I can bust out of the box. I don't need to keep myself locked in here to these standards and these ideals. But I'm going to come across people who keep trying to put me back in the box or keep trying to label me. And I can choose, if I'm far enough in a place of my own radical self-acceptance, of my own well-being, that I could choose to try to educate them better in, based on my abilities, right? Or at least say I'm not at that place, right? At least to know, wait a minute, this is not helpful. This is not in line with who I'm trying to be, and kind of find some other way, I guess, to get out of the conversation or the situation. So I stay out of the box so I don't get harmed by the labels.
Yeah.
Okay.
I need you to go talk to me for me in the world. But one thing I'll add is this last piece. Yes, because here's the one thing I will say sort of that I've noticed in my time of navigating this for myself and doing this work is that if someone has something to say to me about my physicality and my station of life, it has nothing to do with me. It is everything to do with that person and what they are experiencing and going through with that issue. And the reality is that we have the right to set boundaries, and we have a responsibility to teach people how to treat us. And we can quit anything that hurts us, whether it is a flip conversation in a grocery store with a stranger, a lifetime friendship, a relationship with someone of consequence, whether it's a partner or a parent. We can, TV show, social media, we can quit anything that hurts us. And we have a responsibility to show ourselves that we can take care of ourselves. And so I will say that as you navigate conversations or experiences that are triggering or can cause you harm, you can quit every single one of them. You can walk away from a television show or social media. You can also proverbially or directly walk away from a conversation. And so I think it's good in times where we're not sort of emotionally in the moment to think about, you know what, Thanksgiving's coming up. Aunt Bertha always says this to me and it does not feel good. And this year I'm going to have something that I say to her to set the boundary. And so I'm not very confrontational. And so my boundary setting is not very in your face, but it is effective. And I simply say to someone, if someone says something to me that is hurtful, I will say, that's not an appropriate conversation for us to have. And that's how I shut it down. I have had students, I had a student years ago who shared the story of her mom would always say to her, honey, I think you'd be so much happier if you just lost 20 pounds over and over and over again. And somebody in class said, why don't you say to your mom, don't you mean you'd be happier if I lost 20 pounds, Mom? And she did. And her mom never said anything to her again about her weight. Like it just stopped that day. What I have found in having a little bit softer of a boundary, that's not an appropriate conversation for us to have, is that I sometimes have to reset the boundary. And here's why. A person who is in pain over something, if they're not healthy and proactive about healing their pain, that's still so much pain to carry, and they look for unhealthy ways to pass the pain off. And the typical unhealthy way that we've learned to pass the pain off in our culture is to hand it to someone else by hurting them. And so we make these Barbie remarks in different places because for a moment, it makes us forget our own pain and makes us think that person's in so much of a worse situation than I am. And so it's like the transitive property of pain, except it doesn't work. And so what you do by refusing the package is make them at first say, well, holy cow, where did Rebecca get the courage to say that to me? And then if they're not working on their active healing and they're going to see you again in a week or two, they're like, that must have been a fluke. Surely I can hand Rebecca my pain package this time. And they try again, and then you're going to set the boundary. And what I found is if you set a softer boundary, it might take 3 or 4 times of setting it for the person to realize, oh, wow, she's really not taking that anymore. If you set a hard boundary, it can often be like one time and you're done. But it's always worth standing up for yourself and setting your boundary. A, because it reduces your exposure to that experience. But B, it is so affirming to yourself. Like you realize, wow, I can take care of myself. I've got this. And if I have shut down that thing that's been haunting me for 5, 10, 15 years, like it is limitless what I can do. And that's really powerful.
Yeah. And it's an evolution. It's an evolution of things. And, I'm fascinated with the symbolism of circles and spirals. And when I was leading a recent retreat, I was talking to them about the symbolism of a spiral. And it's like when you notice that you're in a similar place, you're in another position, but when you're going up the spiral, you're more open and you're experiencing that same thing, but from a different perspective. And that then helps you in your journey. That helps you to move forward, so it's not a judgment if you're back in a similar scenario, that you're actually more up the spiral, you can see it differently, and that those skills will help you. And, along the line of the boundaries, but I also know that, in my work with clients, that you also have to believe that you're worthy of setting the boundaries.
Yes.
Oh, I don't want to step on anyone's toes, or I don't want to hurt them, and it's like, no, you've got to, in some way, something in you has to be willing to say, I need this boundary for my well-being, and it's okay. And I think that's where radical self-acceptance really comes in as the practice, because it's going to help you with that.
Yes, absolutely. It begins to gather the proof that your worth deserves to be honored.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about your book on radical self-acceptance, because it literally is daily practices, right? So it's like, and it could take that, right? Something that you pay attention to regularly, because you're talking about changing the way you're thinking and changing the way you're talking to yourself. Mm-hmm. So talk to listeners a little bit more about your book.
So one of the things that I realized is that so much of our pain is really the result of a lack of awareness of our own self-worth. And if you value yourself, you don't hurt yourself. And we want so much to be seen and heard and understood in the world. And sometimes we don't realize that the very first person we need that from is ourselves. And so if we begin to see our own worth, the world really expands for us. And so I wrote Beautiful You as a way to give people a tool where they could collect all of the evidence of their worthiness. This isn't a book where I tell the reader to believe in yourself, and here are the 17 reasons why you should believe in yourself. This is a book where the reader compiles the proof of what's already inside of them that is so profoundly defines them and just affirms their worthiness. So what I wanted to do was to provide readers with a journey into a relationship with themselves that's not adversarial and that's life-changing, and that makes them realize, wow, there's just nothing fundamentally wrong with me, where I'm fundamentally right simply because I exist. And then guides the person in sort of a gracious way to live as their champion and companion. And so it really sort of guides the reader in humanizing him or herself on their journey. And so each day there's a short passage. It's typically under 350 words, and then a short exercise you do. And sometimes the exercise is keep this in mind. Sometimes the exercise is write about this. And sometimes the exercise is something that you actively do out in the world. But the idea is that you can just every day put a little bit of energy into shifting, and that those little tiny shifts add up to this profound recognition of worth and this deep self-accepting practice. There's some people who move through it very, day 1 to day 365. There are some people who open it up and sort of say, the day will guide me in what I need. And then there's some people who will go through it and say, this one's not for me, and just skip that date and move forward. And all of those approaches are absolutely okay. I also have moms who put it in their car. And if they have sort of a 12 to 13-year-old or up daughter, will have her grab the book when they're in the car together and read a day, and they discuss it and talk about sort of doing it out in the world. And so there's some neat ways where you can do it with someone in your life as well. There's actually a guide in the book about how to use the book in a group. And I guess Jelly and I developed a yoga and Beautiful You program that folks can access on either one of our websites called Wholehearted, that creates sort of a tandem yoga and Beautiful You experience.
And so what if somebody picks up the book and starts doing it, and then they hear like, I'm not doing this right, or I'm not sure if this is working, or that other kind of unhelpful chatter? Like, what would you say to somebody who is like, ooh, I think this could be really helpful, and then they get it, maybe they do a day or a few days, and then they kind of start to doubt whether or not they can really be good to themselves, they can really be kind to themselves, that they can really actually keep on practicing, and then they will see a difference in their self-worth?
One of the things that I think is important to realize is that if self-criticism were as effective, then we wouldn't need to use it so much, right? Like, it would take care of business the first time. And so, like, it doesn't really work for anything, whether, we're criticizing our parenting or our bodies. Like, it doesn't work. And so embracing this idea of a whole new way of being with ourselves is really powerful. But we have to recognize that we didn't become self-critical in a moment. We developed practices and habits around it, and it took time. And so we're not going to stop being self-critical in a moment. And so as I think about changing relationships with the self, one of the things that I think is important to realize is to know that that's journey, and it takes a little bit of time. And so I like to encourage people that when that self-critical voice is in their head, to not say, well, I failed at this self-acceptance thing, I need to quit. But instead to say to themselves, just a gentle reminder of, I have decided to have a different relationship with myself. I have decided to have a different relationship with myself. And so that quiets the voice in the moment. And what you'll recognize over time is that you are having a different relationship with yourself and needing to say that less. And that's true for if you are working through Beautiful You, if you are working through your wonderful book, Body Kindness, or just working in life, that paying attention, reframing our energy, and moving forward is how we get to the other side of a more gracious way of being with ourselves.
Oh, and who doesn't need more grace?
Seriously. I need more grace all the time. In fact, I was texting with a friend yesterday and she just offered me a kindness. And my final text to her was, I am so grateful for that grace. Thank you.
Yeah. And it's great when we can give it to others, but we have to remember that we need to give it to ourselves too.
Exactly. And that's what I was going to say was like, what if we always said that to ourselves? Like, I'm going to extend this grace and I'm going to accept it.
Yeah, I loved our conversation today. I love the idea of like visualizing this box. I mean, I just love visualization. So this idea of, oop, I jumped in the box. Let me get out of the box, right? Or if somebody else says something, oh, okay, like they're putting me in the box. And depending on where you're at, you deciding how to best set that boundary, which may be, like you said, oh, I'm over you, I'm done with you, bye-bye conversation. It may be that you've built some skill around engaging with them in a conversation because it could be a learning opportunity for them. Though not everybody's teachable, not everybody needs to be your learning project. Right. So to your point, if you are noticing that something could hurt you or harm you and you're not sure it's going to be worth it to your well-being, that may just be a let it go kind of thing.
Yes, perfectly expressed.
Yeah. So I love that. I think it gives us a lot of stuff to work with and practicing the self-acceptance. And again, I'll give links to your website and both of your books. I've read them. I highly recommend them. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with the listeners, how people can find you and connect with you online?
No, you've covered everything. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Well, I will include those links in the show notes. And thank you so much for being on Body Kindness.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you for what you are putting out into the world. It's so important. And I'm just so grateful to be someone who gets to experience your grace and wisdom.
Oh, likewise. Okay. And that's our show. Thank you so much for listening. I would love if you could take a minute and leave a rating and review on iTunes. I know they don't make it very easy, so I have a few quick tips for you. First, launch the Apple Podcast app, and then you're going to click the search button to enter the name Body Kindness, and you'll find my podcast. You'll see the album art. And when you click on the album art, there is going to be a button in the middle at the top. It's called Reviews. Click that. And then when you scroll to the bottom, you will see an option to leave a review. And so you'll click that button and go ahead and write your thoughts. I also would love ideas for future episodes. You can email me, Rebecca@bodykindnessbook.com. Again, that's Rebecca@bodykindnessbook.com. I love chatting about the show and how it's helpful. And so keep those emails coming. And also, if you are not yet completed with the e-course, don't forget that's a free resource for anyone who's interested in practicing body kindness. If you visit bodykindnessbook.com and click on Get Started, just enter in your name and email and you'll get instant access. I'll see you there.